Okay, welcome to today's session. We'll talk about functions in Python. So, what are functions? So, before we start, let's create a new file, Python file, and we'll call it function.py. Okay. So, what functions are? So, functions are nothing but they are an essential block of code that performs a specific task, or you can think of it as a machine where you provide an input and it processes and gives you an output. Now, for one reason, functions are important is because they allow us to write usable codes instead of repeating the same code multiple times, right? Not exactly like a loop, but we can customize what is happening inside our function. Okay. So we can define it once and we can call it whenever we want it to. So this does not make our code shorter, but also modularized, and it is very easy to read and maintain, right? So let's take an example of how a basic syntax of function is. Okay. And then we'll take whatever variations are possible in this function, right? So to define a function, we need to have a keyword called def, right? So anywhere you see this keyword def, we are defining a keyword. So to start with, we have def define, and we'll say function underscore one, right? We'll just say, we'll open and close bracket, give a colon, hit enter, and I'll write the print statement. Print, just say hello, right? Okay, so this is a basic structure of the function. Now, if you want to call this function, how would you call it? So calling is simple. You just have to write the name of the function. Right? So I'll say function one, right? Now let's execute it. So it gives an output of hello, correct? All right. So for instance, if you want to create a simple function that prints hello world, okay, how should we write it? So same thing, we'll use the same function, right? And just change the message here. Instead of hello, we'll say hello world, right? Now if we execute this, the first one will give me hello, second one will give me hello world. Okay, pretty simple. Okay, now the next thing that we want to talk about is using the def keyword and how to take parameters from users, or how we can parameterize this function, right? We'll take two examples. One, we'll take parameters from users. Second, we'll parameterize this also. Okay, let's comment this and let's take the next example. We'll say def, we'll give the name as greet, and we'll say a name, right? We have given a name here, and we'll print inside the message saying inside this particular function saying hello and the name. Simple, right? Now when we want to call this function again, we'll have to say what's the name of the function, greet. And what is greet expecting? It is expecting a name. So I'll say greet John, right? I'll say greet John, and I'll hit enter. What it will do, this John will be passed on to my function inside a variable called name, and we are printing the name inside this function. So if we run this, it will give me hello John. Clear? Now what happens if you don't pass any variable here? What happens if you don't pass this John here? Let's take that also. Let's check that also, right? Let's say we don't want to pass anything. Let's pass an empty string, and let's pass nothing also. Let's pass nothing inside it. Not passing anything, right? So let's run this. What happens? Let's see. Now what happened? So we got hello John, we got hello and a blank message, right? And it showed me greet missing one required positional argument name. So it is expecting a name variable which should be passed on to this particular function so that it can execute, right? So if we have parameterized our function, we need to pass a parameter as well from here. There should be an argument to my function. Clear? Now when we are talking about arguments, let's talk about arguments. Okay. When we are talking about parameters, so we have two parameters or argument. We'll say there are positional and keywords argument. Keyword arguments. Okay. Now what happens here? Now to check this, let's take another example here. What we are explaining is we have a, let's say we have a function define def. Let's say we have a function def addition. Okay, and it takes a and b, a comma b, right? And it returns a plus b. Okay, now what we want to do here next is we'll say result is equals to addition of 10 comma 20. Okay, now what's happening here? And to print it, we'll write print result. Now what is happening here is I am calling my addition function with two variables saying 10 and 20, and it is passed on to my addition function, and this function will return me the sum of it, and I'm printing it here. Okay, so when I run this, I should get 30 in my output, right? So I'm getting 30 here. Correct? Now what happened? If you see by default Python took 10 as first argument A and 20 as second one saying B. So these are positional arguments, right? Now what happens if we swap this? What happens if we swap this calling? Say we have a function, we'll use the same function. Now we'll declare here, we'll say B equals to 10 and A equals to 20. Alright. Now if you run this, what should happen? It will still print me 30 because it took positional argument, but the value for B was 10 and value for A was 20. This we explicitly said to the program that this is the parameter that I'm passing. But since I'm passing it using a reference saying I am already defining my variable here, so they are matched to how the function is being called. So there is B, there is A. Now let's see if I want to change it to a C. What happens? Let's run this and see. It would throw me an error, right? Saying unexpected keywords argument C, because my function is not expecting any variable named C. It is expecting A and B. So it should be passed on as A and B, no matter whether you place A in the first or A in the last, right? So if you are defining it like this, it will be passed on to the function above. In this one, what we saw here was first one was my positional arguments, where the position of the element was already defined and it directly went to the function with the assigned position. Now the second one was my keyword arguments, where I gave the instruction that this is the order that I'm passing and these are the variable names with their values what I want to pass. Alright. Now the third one that we are going to look at is how to make a default parameter or how to make a default argument in the function. Right. So we'll say define, let's say, again we'll take the greet example. We'll take greet and we'll say I am expecting a parameter called name, right? But if no name is received, I want to greet me as guest. And again, I'll print the same thing. I'll print hello and the name. And we'll see, we'll write print and the function, right? Now what happens here? This particular function is also expecting a parameter, right? It's expecting a name, and I'm printing the name along with it. Now in the first example, when we saw here, when we tried to pass an empty string, this one printed just hello, right? Greet, this greet and colon, this greet and quotes, these printed just hello. Whereas the first one printed hello John, but we also had an argument, right? We had greet, just calling the greet function, right? We just called the greet function here without any parameters, right? So this threw an error, right? So this resulted in error, right? Missing positional arguments, right? Now here, when we see now let's call this, right? We are expecting a parameter here, but we are not passing in parameter. Instead we are saying my parameter value itself is guessed, right? What happens when we execute this? So this will print hello guest, right? Oh, I'm again, so it's not returning anything. I should not be, I'll just, my bad. So since it's not returning anything, it printed none here, but this is how I should call it, right? So I'll just run it. So it says hello guest, but what happens if I call it with a different value or a different parameter? I'll say greet, and I'll say John, and I'll run this. What it prints? It prints hello guest, and the second print statement prints hello John. So this is how we implement default parameters if we in a function, right? So if we do not have any values coming in from our function where it is being called, we'll define it in the function name itself, where we are defining the function that this is my default value. If there are no values passed on from my calling instance, use this as a value. If there are any value, replace this with the called values, right? Clear? Now let's talk about what return values are in a function. All right, this is done. We will talk about return values. Return values from a function. All right, so let's take an example. We'll say definition. We want to do now is square root. No, or let's say squaring. Square of a number is, I'm returning number into number, right? Now what I want here is my result is equals to, I'll call the function square with what number I want to be passed as a parameter, and then I'll print the number. Alright, I'll print the output from the function. Right. So what it will do, when I call this function, it will hit this particular function square with a value 5. This 5 is passed on to this particular line, and then it does 5 into 5, and it returns it. It returns it back to from where it is being called. So to take this value or to store this value, we have taken another variable called res, and we have stored it here, right? Now if we print res, I should get the square of this number. All right, so let's run this. What I'm getting 25, right? This is not limited to just one function. We can have n number of activities being performed within this function, and we can return the final output of that function back to from where it is being called, right? Now a function can also return multiple values, right? So this is just one value which is being returned. It can also return multiple values. We'll say, let's define a function. Let's say define get name and age, and I'll take name and age as an input parameters. What I will do, or let's not take anything. Let's just have this function. I'll say name is equals to sudo age is equals to 25, and what I will do, I will return this, return name comma age. Okay, let's comment this one, we don't want this right now. Okay, so this is what we are returning, name and age, right? Now to again capture this value, we'll have to go back to our function. We'll say, what is the function name? Get name and age. So we have to call this function here outside the function with colon, and this value should be stored as called name and age. Okay, so I'm saying name and age are two variables which will hold a value of whatever is coming back from this particular function, get name and age, whatever it is returning. So it is returning two variables which is being stored in my two different variables here. Now the next thing that I want to print is print okay, my name is NA and age is age, right? What happens if I run this? So it will return me multiple values from the function, whatever I have it here, and I am printing that particular function here, right? So this is how you return multiple functions, multiple values from a function, right? Now let's take the same example and let's understand the scope of variable function, the scope of variables within a function, right? So let's understand the scope of variable. So I'll use the same function here. Let's comment this. Right now, if you see this name and age, these are two functions that are local to this particular function. So if you want to print here, if you want to print the name directly here, you can do it. There's nothing stopping you from printing it here, right? Now let's store this. Let's take this name as NA, age is age. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to see if I can print the name outside this function. I'm printing it here, but I also want to say print if name is name, right? And I'll close the inverted commas. All right. Now if you see, it is already highlighting as red here, right? And it is saying unresolved reference name. Why? Because name is a local variable which is defined under this particular function. So we cannot use it outside the function. Either it has to return me some value and I can reuse it, or we have to define this name as global value. Okay. Now if we have to take this as global value, how will we do it? We'll say, let's comment this one. Let's say we are making it global. Okay, we are making it global. I'm making it a global variable. And with the same example, it's just the difference in the placement. So we'll pick this up from here, right? And we'll put it here. We'll put it outside the function and before everything else. And now what I'll do, I'm just returning my name and age. Now you see there is no error highlighted here, right? Because this function has a reference of this name which is already defined earlier to it, and it's in the global scope. So it is pulling the name from here and we can easily print the name here. Now if you have to run it, what it prints? It says, first it prints my name is sudo and age is 25, and the second one prints my name is sudo, right? Simple. So this is how you define a global variable. All right. Now these things would be useful when you are trying to use a counter in your say, it's just an example. If you are using counter in your Selenium, right? How we can implement it? We'll say counter is equals to 0. Okay, and we'll say increment counter equals to 0, and we'll say a function name increment where counter is being referred from the global reference. So there's a keyword to it, global counter, counter plus 1 and return counter. Now this global is used to refer to this particular counter, right? You can also define a local counter which is inside this particular function, but we'll take it when we discuss classes concept. Now for now, it is returning a counter, right? Now I want to print, I just want to call the function first. I'll call the increment function. What happened? I'll call the increment function and I'll print the value of counter. Now what I'm doing, I'm just calling this counter. So counter was 0. Now the first time when I call this particular function, I'll get counter is equals to 1 and this loop will end. I mean this calling will end. Okay? The function call will also end as soon as the execution is ended, right? So if I run this, I'm getting a value 1. Now what happens if I call it multiple times, right? If I keep calling this multiple number of times, all right, so what will happen here? So every time I'm trying to call this particular function, this counter is initialized initially as 0. Now, every time when I'm trying to call this increment function, this counter value will be incremented with 1, right? So this is 1, this increment again, this call will also increment the value as plus 1. So counter will become 2. Now once this is called, the counter was already assigned as 2. Now it will become 3. Now here it will become 4. If we execute this, what we'll get? We'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So consider a loop where you are calling a function multiple number of times. So that's where this counter variable will help you to keep a reference of how many times this function is being called, or there can be multiple uses of it. Okay, this is just one example. Now this is when you knew that you are going to expect a certain number of inputs and you just have to process it and return it. Now what happens if you don't know the number of arguments that you are expecting inside this particular function, right? What will you do? You have a thing called star args, okay, and kw args, right? So these are nothing but these are flexible signatures. Okay, so these are flexible function signatures. What it does is, let's take an example and I'll explain this how it works. Okay, let's say I have a function to add, right? I have a function, I'll say define sum of all and I'll just give args. Okay, now what I want to do here is I'll say return. I don't want to have these many things. I'll just say return and I'll use an inbuilt function called sum of all the arguments that are coming in. Okay, just one line. Okay. Now I haven't defined the number of arguments that this function is expecting, but this args keyword makes it a flexible function signature. Okay, what it is called as a flexible function signature. Okay, what it will do is it takes any number of arguments that is coming in with this particular function calling. Now let's say I want to print sum underscore all. I'll give 1, 2. Okay, now I'll use the same thing again and with variable arguments. I'll have 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's take it until here. I'll take another one. I'll take a different data type. Let's say 2.5, 3.6, or for ease of it, we'll take 3.5. I'll say 0.5. Okay, so first one is taking 1, second one is taking 5 arguments. The third one is taking 3 arguments with a float time. The first two are integer, third one is float. Okay. Now, if I run this, what will I get? We'll get sum of all of the arguments that we are passing in different lines. So the first one will return 3. I forgot to comment this one. Re-execute, and the first one will return 3, right? The second one will return 15, and the third one is returning 6.5. So if you see here, I haven't defined the number of arguments that I'm expecting. Instead, I just said I am expecting some arguments. Be flexible in taking it, right? So I can expect any number of arguments here. Okay. Now, similarly, we have KWRs. So KWRs is nothing but keyword arguments. Okay. So what it does, it will take keywords arguments and it keeps it as a key value pair. Okay, it stores it as a key value pair, right? So I'll say define, let's say print. Okay, let's say print, and I gave it as keyword arguments, and I used a loop for key and value inside all the keyword arguments that I'm expecting, and I'm printing the key and value. All right. Now for the first one, I'm just printing name as John, age as 25. The second one, I'm printing name as John, age as 25, city as New York, right? So these are all my key and values. Okay. Now if I run this, what happens? Let's comment the first one. Run this. What it will print? The first one printed John 25. The second one printed John 25 and the city as New York. So the second one, what it does? How is it different from the first one? How is it different? Now the first one, we just have the arguments and we passed it to a function. It returned the sum of it, and in the first approach, when we used args, there was no keyword stored along with it, right? But whereas in the second one, when we are passing a particular argument, we are also passing a keyword assigned to it. So we are saying name is John, age is 25. Similarly, when I'm printing it here, I'm printing the key first. So my key is nothing but the name and the value is John, right? So this is my key name and this is my value John. So this is how keyword arguments is also used, right? So this is also implemented in the similar fashion how args is implemented when you are unsure of how many number of arguments you are expecting, or if you are expecting a key value kind of pair, then you can use keyword arguments. Else you can use the args. Okay? But it is always recommended that you have your arguments defined in the function. You don't have to rely with this args. You can just define the number of arguments that you are expecting in a function, and then you can use it inside the function. Okay. Now the last one that we are going to talk about here on functions concept is the lambda functions. Okay. Lambda functions. What are these? What are lambda functions? So lambda functions are nothing but a small anonymous functions which is used to perform a simple operations. Okay? It's more like a throwaway functions. Okay? You can just use it without using the keyword def. All right. So let's take this example where we did a square, right? We did a square operation here. All right. Let's take the same example in a normal approach. How we are doing it? We are defining a function with the name square, taking an argument as number, and we are multiplying it, returning the values into a variable, storing a variable. We are storing the return type. We are storing the result in a variable called res, and we are printing the result. Correct? Now, a lambda approach to this will be, so the keyword is lambda. We'll say number into number. Okay. Now this has to be stored in some value. So we'll use a value called result is equals to lambda of number into number. Okay. Now if I have to print this, I'll use print result and I'll pass the same thing, right? Like how we passed square here. So this particular lambda expression is stored in a variable called result. So this result expects an argument and that is nothing but this 5. Okay. And whatever I'm passing from here gets replaced in this num variable. Okay. Okay. Now let's run both of these. What I'll get? I'm getting the same result, correct? So this is using a normal function approach and this is using a lambda approach. Okay. Let's try to multiply a number using lambda. Okay. So how we'll write it? We'll write some value where the lambda expression is stored as, and we'll write lambda, we'll say a comma b colon. What operations we want to perform? We are expecting two inputs a and b, and what we want to do with a and b is a multiplied by b. Cool. We'll hit enter and we'll say print x. Okay, print x, and with this x I'm passing a value 5 and 6. Okay. All right. So again, if I have to run this, I'll get 30. That is 5 into 6 is 30. Clear? So these serve as small examples when you small functions when you don't want to define it using the def keyword. You can make use of lambda, but a lambda function is useful when you are trying to implement it inside a function. It is more beneficial. Yeah. Or let's take an example on it how this is useful. Let's say I have a function define, just a sec, let's say define my function. Okay, I'll say my function and it takes a parameter called n. Okay, and I'll say return lambda a, doing what? A into n. Okay, now what I will do is this. So doubled, I've tripled, and then I will call double and triple. Okay, now what I am trying to do here is I have lambda. Let's comment this one. I have lambda here. What it is doing, it is trying to multiply whatever the argument it has with a particular value that is being passed on, right? Now, this is inside a function, right? This is inside a function called my function and it has a lambda expression inside it. Okay. It is returning a lambda expression. So every time I am calling my function, I am passing or I am getting this lambda expression as a result. So whenever I am calling, what this means is you have to understand this well. What this one is doing, so my function is now stored as a star n. Okay, and what is the value of n? N is nothing but 2. Okay, when I execute this is how it will be interpreted. And the second one is again interpreted as a star 3. Okay, 1 second. Now, when I try to call this function double, okay, double is using the same implementation of my function with the value here, with the argument here 2. Triple is using it as 3, and what I'm doing here is I'm multiplying it, right? So I'm just printing it here as my double is here and my tripler is here. Now if I run this, what happens? The first one gave me 22, the second gave me 33. Why? Because the first time when I called it was 11 and this double had a variable of a into 2. A is what? A is coming from here. Alright. So A is coming from here. So double with 11, what it gives me? It gives me 11 into 2. And then triple called with 11, triple called with 11 here is 11 into 3. That is 33. Okay. Okay. Then let's wrap up for today's lesson. Okay. And this was all I wanted to discuss on the function aspect in Python. Now the next one will take up the remaining data types, the Python list, tuples, and other data types that we haven't talked about. Let's discuss more on that in the next lecture. Okay. Thanks for joining, guys. Bye.